Today, the nation's central bank decided to hold its benchmark interest rate steady as it watches political risks at home and abroad. For more, our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin joins us in the studio. Soo-jin, what was the reasoning behind today's rate decision?
Sure. So the decision to keep rates steady was announced following the first Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year. The move keeps the benchmark interest rate unchanged at 3%. It's also worth noting that it comes after two consecutive quarter-point cuts in both October and November monetary policy meetings last year. Let's take a listen to what the Bank of Korea governor said regarding the decision.
We decided that it would be appropriate to maintain the current rate while monitoring internal and external conditions, as domestic political circumstances and changes in major countries' economic policies have increased uncertainties in terms of the economic outlook and foreign exchange markets.
There was a lot of speculation in the markets before the decision was announced. A rate cut had been anticipated by some due to concerns about a downturn in the economy due to the ongoing political turmoil, as well as uncertainties related to President-elect Donald Trump's second term. But the Bank of Korea ultimately decided on a freeze due to weaker Korean won against a weak greenback and minutes from the U.S. Fed's December meeting where officials hinted they would be moving more slowly on interest rate cuts.
And now we're seeing a bottoming of inflation, actually prices ticking up again. What does that mean? The Fed will probably not cut rates anywhere near where the market thought it would just a few months ago.
If the interest rate gap between the two countries widens, it could lead to further currency depreciation. In December, the average won-dollar exchange rate stood at 1,434.42, a change of nearly 3% from an average of 1,393.38 in November. But according to an expert, the Bank of Korea will not be able to provide more liquidity and supply more U.S. dollars into the market. Here's what he said.
The BOK cannot provide liquidity to stabilize the financial market. Greater liquidity lowers the value of Korean won, and it will eventually push the inflation rate upward and will be another big threat on the Korean economy.
The country's annual consumer inflation rose by 2.3% in 2024, the lowest rate since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020.
How does this year's economy look like? What does the Bank of Korea say?
So we just saw how inflation last year managed to stay in the 2% range. And in November last year, the Bank of Korea forecasted consumer prices to rise 1.9% this year, before President Yoon Suk-yeol's surprise declaration of martial law in December. The Bank of Governors said today that taking into consideration the political turmoil since then, the central bank has adjusted this year's forecast up 0.15 percentage points to 2.05% if the won-dollar exchange rate remains in the 1,470 range. And the somber tone was also present in the central bank's estimate that the country's economic growth in the fourth quarter of last year may have been even lower than the 0.2%. This year's economic growth is also expected to be sluggish, according to an expert, as exports are expected to weaken due to the political uncertainties. Let's take a listen.
I'm not confident that exports will be the engine of growth for Korea this year. So the engine of growth for Korea has to come from consumption and investment, and that will not happen unless the demand increases domestically, and that would require lower interest rates.
And how does the rate decision impact the economy, and can we expect rate cuts in the future?
Right, so what stood out the most to me today in the press conference after the decision was announced was the Bank of Korea governor saying that for this particular rate freeze decision, the Monetary Policy Committee placed more importance on tackling external economic conditions, such as the upcoming FOMC's interest rate decision. One expert said the decision to not lower rates this time was actually a wise one.
If the rate was lowered and the United States, as widely expected, doesn't, there would have been capital outflows and the Korean won may have weakened further.
But while external factors had precedence over internal factors this time, the Bank of Korea hinted at possible rate cuts in the future, as the governor said that 6 out of the 7 Monetary Policy Committee members were open to lowering the interest rate within 3 months. This would mean that a rate cut may be carried out as early as its next meeting in February.
All right, thank you for the report today.
Thank you for having me.